The mansion stood at the edge of the sprawling countryside, a monolith of stone and history. It loomed against the gray sky, its high, arched windows casting an eerie glow into the evening mist. To outsiders, the Harrington estate was a testament to wealth and power, a relic of old money preserved in time. To Amelia Alvarez, it was a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Amelia had been working as a housekeeper at the Harrington estate for 3 months. Her days consumed by dusting priceless artifacts, polishing chandeliers, and ensuring every corner of the sprawling home gleamed with perfection. It was a far cry from the modest life she'd left behind in her small, quiet hometown. But she had a purpose, one she rarely spoke of. Her mother's disappearance 20 years ago had shaped her life in ways she still struggled to articulate. Carmen Alvarez, a warm and spirited woman, had vanished when Amelia was just 10. The only clues were vague whispers of her having left to work for a wealthy family in the city. Amelia had grown up haunted by unanswered questions, and when she'd seen the Harrington estate's job listing, something deep within her had pushed her to apply. Now, as she scrubbed the polished floors of the grand dining room, her mind drifted. The house felt heavy with secrets, its silence often punctuated by creaks and groans, as though the walls themselves bore witness to untold stories. Her reverie was broken by the arrival of her employer, Margaret Harrington, the estate's matriarch. Margaret was a striking woman in her 60s, with an air of refinement that demanded attention. She entered the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Amelia," Margaret said, her tone as sharp as ever. "When you've finished here, I need you to organize the library. Some of the books are out of place." "Yes, Mrs. Harrington," Amelia replied, keeping her eyes downcast. Margaret paused for a moment, studying her with an unreadable expression before leaving the room. Amelia exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. The library was Amelia's favorite room in the mansion, though it also intimidated her. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books lined the walls, and a grand mahogany desk sat beneath a crystal chandelier. As she began her work, carefully dusting and arranging the volumes, something unusual caught her eye. A photograph, half hidden between 2 books. Amelia pulled it out, her brow furrowing as she studied the image. It was old, the edges worn and faded. In the photo, a young woman stood in front of a large fountain, her expression serene. Amelia's heart stopped. The woman in the photograph was her mother. Her hand trembled as she clutched the picture, her mind reeling. She flipped it over, finding a date scrawled in neat handwriting, June 1998. Below it were the initials CH. "What are you doing?" Amelia whirled around, nearly dropping the photo. Margaret Harrington stood in the doorway, her piercing eyes narrowing as they landed on the photograph in Amelia's hand. I found this in the books," Amelia stammered, her voice barely audible. Margaret's gaze darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That doesn't belong to you. Give it to me." Reluctantly, Amelia handed over the photograph, her heart pounding. "The woman in the photo, she's my mother." Margaret froze, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before her mask of composure returned. "That's impossible," she said curtly. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not," Amelia insisted, her voice growing steadier. "That's Carmen Alvarez. I know her face anywhere." Margaret's expression turned icy. "You're overstepping, Amelia. Your job is to clean, not to dig through things that don't concern you." "But it does concern me," Amelia said, her voice breaking. "If my mother worked here, I have a right to know what happened to her." Margaret's jaw tightened, her silence stretching uncomfortably long. Finally, she spoke, her tone clipped. "You'll find that some questions are better left unanswered. Now, get back to your duties." She turned and walked out, leaving Amelia standing in the middle of the library, the photograph, and its implications, burned into her mind. That night, Amelia lay awake in her small room at the back of the mansion, her thoughts racing. Margaret's reaction had confirmed her suspicions. Her mother had been connected to this house. But why had Margaret tried to dismiss it so quickly? And what did the initials CH mean? The answers felt closer than ever, yet still shrouded in mystery. Amelia clenched her fists, determination surging through her. Whatever secrets the Harrington estate held about her mother, she would uncover them. The following morning, the mansion felt different. Amelia couldn't tell if it was her heightened awareness or the oppressive silence that made the air feel heavier. Margaret Harrington's warning replayed in her mind, but instead of deterring her, it fueled her resolve. If her mother had once worked here, Amelia needed to know why her presence had been erased. As she cleaned the grand staircase, Amelia's thoughts drifted back to the photograph. Her mother's serene face haunted her. The fountain in the background had to be on the estate grounds, but in her 3 months here, Amelia hadn't seen anything resembling it. Was it hidden, or had it been removed, like the photograph itself, buried in a forgotten corner of the library? Her musings were interrupted by the appearance of a younger man descending the stairs. Nathan Harrington, Margaret's son, carried himself with an ease that belied his privileged upbringing. Tall and athletic, with sharp green eyes, he was the kind of person people instinctively noticed. Amelia had exchanged few words with him during her time at the mansion. Their lives existed on parallel tracks that rarely crossed. "Good morning," Nathan said as he reached the bottom step, his tone polite but distracted. "Good morning," Amelia replied, keeping her head down. He hesitated, studying her for a moment. "You're new, right, Amelia, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," she said, gripping the railing as though it might steady her. "You've been working hard," Nathan remarked, his voice softer. "I hope my mother isn't giving you too much trouble." Amelia forced a smile. "Nothing I can't handle." Nathan smiled back, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. "Let me know if you ever need anything. Sometimes things around here aren't what they seem." Before Amelia could respond, he turned and walked toward the study, leaving her with more questions than answers. That evening, as the rest of the staff retired to their quarters, Amelia decided to search for the fountain from the photograph. Equipped with only a flashlight and her determination, she slipped out of the mansion and into the sprawling gardens. The cool night air nipped at her skin, the moon casting long shadows across the manicured hedges. The gardens were vast, a maze of winding paths and forgotten corners. Amelia's flashlight cut through the darkness as she moved deeper into the estate, her footsteps crunching softly against the gravel. After nearly an hour of searching, she rounded a corner and froze. There it was, the fountain. It stood in a secluded clearing, overgrown with ivy and surrounded by trees that had long since gone untended. The once pristine stone was cracked and weathered, its ornate carvings barely visible beneath layers of moss. But it was unmistakable, the fountain from the photograph. Amelia approached it slowly, her heart pounding. She could almost see her mother standing there, posing for the photograph 2 decades earlier. As she reached out to touch the fountain's edge, a voice behind her made her jump. "What are you doing out here?" She spun around, her flashlight illuminating Nathan's face. His expression was a mix of surprise and suspicion. Amelia hesitated, caught off guard. "I found this in the library." She pulled the photograph from her pocket and held it out to him. Nathan took it, his brows knitting together as he studied the image. "Where did you get this?" "It was hidden in one of the books," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "The woman in the photo is my mother. She disappeared 20 years ago, and I think she worked here." Nathan's expression darkened. "My mother told you to leave this alone, didn't she?" "Yes," Amelia admitted, her voice firm. "But I can't. She's hiding something, and I need to know the truth." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what you're getting into. My mother. She's not someone you want to cross." "I don't care," Amelia said, her voice filled with quiet defiance. "This is about my family. If you know anything, you need to tell me." Nathan hesitated, his gaze shifting between Amelia and the photograph. Finally, he nodded. "Come with me." Nathan led Amelia back to the mansion, bypassing the main hall and heading toward the east wing, a part of the house the staff rarely entered. He stopped in front of a door and produced a key, unlocking it with a sharp click. Inside was a small sitting room, dimly lit and filled with old furniture covered in dust. Nathan moved to a cabinet and pulled out a leather-bound journal, handing it to Amelia. "This belonged to my father," he said. "He kept records of everything, including the staff. If your mother worked here, she'll be in there." Amelia opened the journal with trembling hands, flipping through pages of neat, meticulous writing. Names and dates were listed, along with brief notes about each employee. Then she found it. Carmen Alvarez, hired June 1998. Housekeeper. Amelia's breath hitched. There it was, in black and white, a confirmation that her mother had been here. "What else does it say?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Amelia scanned the entry, her heart sinking as she read the final note. "Dismissed abruptly, July 1998. "What does that mean?" Amelia asked, her voice breaking. "Why would she be dismissed after only a month?" Nathan shook his head. "I don't know. But if she was dismissed, there might be a reason my mother doesn't want you digging into this." Amelia looked up at him, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll keep digging until I find out." As Amelia returned to her room that night, the journal tucked securely under her arm, she felt a mix of triumph and dread. She was closer to the truth than ever, but she could feel the weight of unseen forces pressing against her. The Harrington estate wasn't just a house filled with secrets. It was a place where lives had been unraveled, her mother's included, and Amelia was determined to uncover why. The journal rested on Amelia's bedside table like a forbidden relic, its presence a silent reminder of the secrets she had uncovered. Though her heart raced with the promise of answers, a knot of fear twisted in her stomach. What had truly happened to her mother in July 1998? The following morning, Amelia awoke with renewed determination. She tucked the journal into her bag and set about her duties as if nothing had changed. Margaret Harrington's sharp eyes followed her movements throughout the day, but Amelia avoided direct contact, unwilling to risk any more confrontation. It wasn't until late afternoon, while dusting the study, that she found her next clue. A collection of framed photographs hung on the wall, each depicting members of the Harrington family at various stages of their lives. One photo caught Amelia's attention, a group shot taken in front of the same fountain she had found the night before. Her gaze zeroed in on the edges of the image. There, partially cropped from the frame, was her mother. The realization struck her like a blow. Carmen Alvarez wasn't just a housekeeper. She had been a part of their lives, close enough to appear in family photos. "What are you looking at?" Amelia spun around to find Nathan standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. "This photo," she said, pointing. "My mother is in it. Why would she be in a family photo?" Nathan frowned and stepped closer, studying the image. "She shouldn't be. My mother wouldn't have allowed that. Unless she was more than just staff," Amelia murmured, her mind racing. Nathan's brow furrowed, his unease evident. "What are you implying?" "I don't know yet," Amelia admitted. "But she was dismissed abruptly after only a month. There has to be a reason." Nathan hesitated before nodding. "Meet me in the East Wing tonight. There's something I need to show you." That evening, Amelia slipped away to the East Wing, her footsteps muffled against the carpeted halls. Nathan was waiting for her outside the same sitting room where he had given her the journal. "I've been thinking about what you said," Nathan began, his voice low. "If your mother was involved in something unusual, it might explain some things I've noticed over the years." "Like what?" Amelia pressed. Nathan opened the door and led her inside. He walked to a small desk and pulled out a stack of letters bound with twine. "These are letters my father wrote before he died," Nathan explained. "I found them a few years ago, hidden in a compartment in his desk. Most of them are about business, but some mention staff members, your mother included." Amelia's hands trembled as she untied the bundle and sifted through the letters. One in particular stood out, dated July 2nd, 1998. "Dear Margaret, I must insist we resolve the matter with Carmen immediately. Her presence here is becoming problematic, and the risks far outweigh the benefits. I trust you to handle this discreetly, as you always do. Charles." Amelia's breath caught. "Who is Charles?" "My father," Nathan said, his tone grave. He passed away 10 years ago. What did he mean by problematic? Amelia asked, her voice shaking. Nathan shook his head. I don't know. But my mother was always fiercely protective of his reputation. If there was any scandal involving the staff, she would have done everything in her power to bury it. Amelia stared at the letter, her mind reeling. What had her mother been involved in that warranted such a cryptic warning? The next day, Amelia's search led her to the mansion's attic. It was a cavernous space filled with trunks, crates, and discarded furniture shrouded in dust. If any records of her mother's time at the estate had been hidden, this seemed like the most likely place. As she rummaged through the clutter, she uncovered an old leather trunk bearing the initials "H" inside. She found a collection of personal items, letters, photographs, and a small velvet box. Amelia hesitated before opening it, her heart pounding. Inside was a locket. She opened the locket with trembling fingers and gasped. Inside was a photograph of her mother, smiling softly, and a lock of her hair. Her stomach twisted. Why would her mother's photograph be in Charles Harrington's personal belongings? Amelia? She spun around to see Nathan standing at the attic door, his expression one of alarm. What are you doing up here? He asked, stepping closer. I found this, she said, holding up the locket. It was in your father's trunk. Nathan's face darkened as he examined the locket. This doesn't make sense. Doesn't it? Amelia asked, her voice rising. What if my mother was more than just a housekeeper to your father? What if that's why she was dismissed? Nathan's gaze snapped to hers, a mixture of shock and denial. You're saying they had a relationship? I'm saying something happened between them, Amelia said. And whatever it was, your mother knew. That's why she's been trying to keep me from finding out the truth. Nathan stepped back, his hands running through his hair. If this is true, it changes everything. It doesn't just change your life, Nathan, Amelia said, her voice trembling. It explains mine. It explains why my mother disappeared without a trace, why my family was torn apart. Nathan looked at her, his expression softening. Then we need to confront my mother. Together. Amelia nodded, though fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Margaret Harrington had been guarding this secret for decades. What would she do to keep it buried? The weight of the locket pressed heavily in Amelia's pocket as she and Nathan made their way to Margaret Harrington's private sitting room. Amelia's heart pounded with each step, her mind racing through the possibilities. If her mother had been involved with Charles Harrington, what had it cost her? And why had Margaret gone to such lengths to conceal it? Nathan paused outside the door, his hand hovering over the knob. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked, his voice low. Amelia nodded, her jaw tightening. I've waited 20 years for answers. I'm ready. He pushed the door open and they stepped inside. Margaret was seated on a plush armchair near the fireplace, a book in her hands. She glanced up, her expression hardening the moment she saw Amelia. Nathan, what is the meaning of this? Margaret asked sharply. I thought I made it clear that this girl is overstepping her bounds. This isn't about her overstepping, Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. It's about the truth. Margaret's eyes narrowed. The truth? About what? Nathan motioned for Amelia to step forward. She hesitated, then pulled the locket from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. Margaret's eyes flicked to the locket, her face paling slightly. Where did you get that? Margaret demanded, her voice taut. In the attic, Amelia replied, her tone steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. In a trunk with Charles's initials. Why was my mother's photograph in his possession? Margaret's lips thinned, and she stood abruptly, her posture rigid. That is none of your concern. It is my concern. Amelia shot back, her voice rising. My mother disappeared after working here, and you've been hiding the truth. I deserve to know what happened to her. Margaret's gaze shifted to Nathan, who stood silently by Amelia's side. Her expression wavered for a moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing over her face. Nathan, Margaret said quietly, leave us. No. Nathan said firmly. If you're going to tell her the truth, I need to hear it too. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger, but she seemed to realize she had no way out. With a heavy sigh, she sat back down, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. Very well, she said, her voice cold. If you insist on digging up the past, then you should know it wasn't as innocent as you think. Amelia's breath caught, her pulse pounding in her ears. What do you mean? Margaret's gaze fixed on the fire, as if avoiding Amelia's eyes would lessen the weight of her words. Your mother, Carmen, was a housekeeper here, yes, but she and Charles, they had an affair. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Amelia staggered back, her mind reeling. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like a knife to the chest. My father, Nathan said, his voice breaking. You're saying he had an affair with her? Yes, Margaret said curtly. It was brief, but it was enough to threaten everything we had built. Your father was a fool. He thought he could save her, that he could provide for her in some way. But he didn't see the damage it would do to our family. What happened to her? Amelia demanded, her voice trembling. Why did she leave? Margaret's gaze snapped to Amelia, her expression hard and unyielding. I made sure she left. She had no place here, not in our family, not in this house. I told her to go, and she did. You forced her out, Amelia said, her voice rising. You destroyed her life. I protected my family, Margaret said, her tone sharp. Your mother knew what she was doing when she got involved with Charles. She wasn't some helpless victim. She was a person, Amelia countered, her anger bubbling over. A person with a family. A daughter who never saw her again because of you. Margaret's composure wavered, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. She left to protect you, she said quietly. She didn't want you caught up in the scandal. Amelia froze. What are you saying? Margaret hesitated, then looked directly at Amelia. You don't know, do you? Charles wasn't just her lover. He was your father. The room spun, and Amelia gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Her chest heaved as the revelation sank in. No, Amelia whispered, shaking her head. That's not possible. It is, Margaret said, her voice like ice. Your mother was carrying his child. That's why I forced her to leave. If the truth had come out, it would have ruined us. Nathan stood frozen, his face pale. So, she's my sister? Margaret didn't answer, her silence confirming everything. The room descended into chaos. Amelia's sobs filled the space as she tried to process the bombshell that had just been dropped. Nathan stood beside her, his hands running through his hair as he struggled to come to terms with the truth. How could you do this? Nathan demanded, turning to Margaret. You tore a family apart for the sake of appearances. Margaret's face hardened. I did what I had to do. You think I enjoyed it? Watching your father betray me, watching him fall for a woman who didn't belong in our world. I had to protect you, Nathan. I had to protect us. You didn't protect anyone, Nathan said, his voice shaking with anger. You destroyed lives. Margaret's gaze flickered to Amelia, and for a moment, something like regret crossed her face. Perhaps I did, she admitted quietly. But it's too late to change the past. Amelia wiped her tears, her voice trembling but resolute. You might not be able to change the past, but I can make sure my mother's story is told. She deserved better than what you gave her. Without another word, Amelia turned and walked out of the room, leaving Margaret and Nathan behind. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. Amelia stumbled through the grand halls of the Harrington mansion, her breath ragged and uneven. Margaret Harrington's words echoed in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. He was your father. The revelation was too much to bear. She leaned against a marble column to steady herself, clutching the locket in her trembling hand. Her mother's serene face stared back at her from inside the locket, a painful reminder of all the years lost and the secrets buried beneath layers of privilege and lies. How could Charles Harrington, a man she had never met, be her father? And why had her mother never told her? Footsteps approached, and Nathan appeared beside her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions. "Amelia," Nathan said softly, his voice breaking the tension. I had no idea." "Neither did I," Amelia whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "All these years, I thought my mother abandoned me, but she was forced out, forced to protect me from your family." Nathan flinched at the accusation but didn't deny it. "My mother, she was ruthless when it came to protecting our reputation. I didn't realize how far she was willing to go." Amelia straightened, her tears giving way to simmering anger. "She took everything from me. My mother, my family, even my identity. And for what? To save her image." Nathan looked away, guilt etched into his features. "You're right, she did. But this changes everything. You're my sister." Amelia stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her. Sister. The concept felt foreign, impossible, and yet undeniable. The same blood that flowed through his veins was in hers. They shared a father, a man neither of them could fully understand. "Why did she tell me now?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. "Why not keep it buried like she has for 20 years? Nathan hesitated, then met her gaze. "Because she knew you wouldn't stop digging. And because she's afraid." "Afraid of what?" Amelia demanded. "That the truth could destroy what's left of our family." The following days were a blur of emotions. Amelia avoided Margaret, spending most of her time poring over the journal and letters Nathan had given her. Each word, each note painted a more complex picture of Charles Harrington. A man torn between duty and desire, loyalty and love. The more she read, the more Amelia began to see the depth of his affection for her mother. One letter stood out among the rest. "My dearest Carmen, I cannot undo the mistakes I've made, but I want you to know that you and the child mean more to me than you'll ever understand. I will do whatever it takes to ensure your safety, even if it means letting you go. Please forgive me, Charles." Amelia's tears blurred the ink. He had cared. Her mother had meant something to him, even if their love had been overshadowed by the Harrington family's iron grip. But the letter raised more questions than it answered. If Charles had wanted to protect them, why hadn't he? Why had he let Margaret force her mother out? Nathan found her in the library that evening, the letter spread out on the desk in front of her. "What did he mean by ensuring your safety?" Amelia asked as Nathan sat beside her. "What were they afraid of?" Nathan frowned, his brow furrowing in thought. "My father wasn't just a businessman. He had powerful enemies, people who wouldn't have thought twice about using someone like your mother to hurt him. If he sent her away, maybe it was to keep her safe from them." "But he didn't send her away," Amelia said, her voice tightening. "Your mother did. And she did it because she wanted to protect her image, not my mother." Nathan sighed, his expression conflicted. "I don't know. But there's one place we haven't looked. My father's office." Amelia's pulse quickened. "His office? I thought this was his journal." Nathan shook his head. "His personal office in the East Wing has been locked since he died. My mother never let anyone go through it. But if there are answers, they're there." That night, after the rest of the staff had gone to bed, Nathan led Amelia to the East Wing. The corridor was dark and silent, the air thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. They stopped in front of a heavy oak door. "This is it?" Nathan whispered, pulling a key from his pocket. He unlocked the door, and it creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture and stacks of papers lay untouched, as if Charles Harrington had simply stepped out and never returned. A large desk dominated the center of the room, its surface littered with documents, photographs, and ledgers. Amelia's eyes darted to a small safe in the corner. "What's in there?" Nathan crossed the room and knelt in front of the safe. After several failed attempts, he managed to crack the combination. Inside were folders marked confidential and a sealed envelope with her mother's name written on it. Amelia's hands shook as she took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter and a smaller envelope addressed to her. "My dearest Carmen, If you're reading this, it means you've returned to the estate. I hoped you never would. It is no longer safe for you here. Margaret's anger has made her reckless, and she will stop at nothing to erase what she views as your betrayal. I've left provisions to ensure your safety, but if I cannot protect you myself, know that I love you. You and our child are the best parts of my life. Charles. Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she opened the smaller envelope. Inside was a simple note. For my daughter, Amelia. Though I may never meet you, know that you were born of love. I hope one day you will forgive me. Her legs gave way, and she sank to the floor, clutching the letter to her chest. Nathan knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. You deserve to know, Nathan said softly. And now you do. Amelia wiped her tears, her voice trembling but resolute. I can't forgive them, not yet, but I can tell the truth. And I will. The letters from Charles Harrington shifted everything Amelia thought she knew about her past. Her father's words were filled with guilt and love, but they also raised the stakes. Margaret Harrington had done more than banish her mother. She had deliberately erased Amelia's place in the family. For years, Margaret had buried the truth to protect her reputation, leaving Amelia and her mother to bear the cost of her choices. Nathan stood beside Amelia in his father's office, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. He had read the letters too, and his face was a mixture of guilt and sorrow. She lied to us, Nathan said, his voice tight. She lied to me. She lied to everyone, Amelia replied, her voice trembling with anger. And for what? To protect her pride? Her name. Nathan hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Amelia said, rising to her feet. We need to confront her. Nathan's jaw tightened. She won't make this easy. I don't expect her to, Amelia said, her voice steady. But she needs to answer for what she's done. The confrontation came the next morning, as Margaret Harrington presided over breakfast in the grand dining room. Nathan and Amelia entered together, their expressions resolute. Margaret looked up from her tea, her gaze narrowing. What is this? She asked sharply. I don't recall inviting you to sit. We're done with games, Mother, Nathan said, his tone cold. It's time you tell us the whole truth. Margaret's eyes flicked to Amelia, then back to Nathan. I've told you what you need to know. No, Amelia said, stepping forward. You told us the version of the truth that suited you, but I've seen the letters. Charles left behind everything you tried to hide. Margaret's face paled, but her composure remained intact. You shouldn't have gone through his things, and you shouldn't have destroyed lives to protect yourself, Amelia countered, her voice rising. You took my mother's life from her, and you took mine too. She didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because you forced her out. Margaret's hands trembled as she set her teacup down. You don't understand. I was protecting this family. Protecting it from what? Nathan demanded. From the truth? From a scandal you were too proud to face. Margaret stood, her towering presence casting a long shadow across the room. Yes, Nathan, from the truth. Do you think this family would have survived if people had found out that your father had a child with the housekeeper? We would have been ruined. You ruined us anyway, Nathan said, his voice trembling with anger. You turned our family into a lie. Margaret's gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her cold exterior. I did what I thought was best. You'll never understand the pressures I faced, the sacrifices I had to make. Amelia stepped closer, her voice steady. My mother was a person, Margaret. She wasn't just an inconvenience you could erase. She loved Charles and he loved her. And whether you like it or not, I'm part of this family. Margaret's eyes brimmed with unshed tears, but her voice remained firm. You have no idea how hard it was to make those choices. No, I don't, Amelia said. But I know this. You've been hiding behind those choices for 20 years, and it's time you faced the consequences. The Harrington name carried weight, but it couldn't shield Margaret from the truth. Nathan and Amelia decided to make the letters public, exposing the full story behind Carmen's abrupt dismissal and Charles's love for her. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Harrington estate and the local community, tarnishing the family's carefully cultivated image. Margaret, now ostracized by the social circles she had worked so hard to maintain, retreated to the estate, her once commanding presence diminished. Nathan, however, refused to let the fallout define him. "This isn't about punishing her," Nathan told Amelia one evening as they sat on the mansion's terrace. "It's about setting things right." Amelia nodded, though the wounds were still raw. "For my mother, it's too late. But maybe we can make sure no one else suffers the way she did." Weeks later, Amelia stood in the estate's overgrown garden, staring at the fountain where her mother had once been photographed. Nathan joined her, a quiet solidarity between them. "What happens now?" Amelia asked, her voice soft. Nathan shrugged. "I don't know. But I do know one thing. You're my sister. And that means we're in this together." Amelia looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I never thought I'd have a family again." "You always had one," Nathan said. "It was just buried under the lies." For the first time in weeks, Amelia smiled. The truth had been painful, but it had also given her something she hadn't realized she needed. A connection to a brother who now stood beside her, ready to face whatever came next. As the sun set over the estate, Amelia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The mansion's secrets had finally been unearthed, and though the scars remained, she could see a path forward. She placed her hand on the edge of the fountain, her mother's locket warm against her skin. "I'll make sure your story isn't forgotten, Mama," she whispered, "and I'll make you proud." Beside her, Nathan nodded, his gaze steady. Together, they turned and walked back toward the house, ready to rebuild their fractured family, one truth at a time. The Harrington estate felt quieter in the days following the public revelation. The whispers of scandal had reached every corner of the community, and the once glorious family name had lost much of its luster. For Margaret Harrington, the fallout was more than she could bear. The woman who had once ruled the estate with an iron will now retreated into her private quarters, her presence barely felt throughout the vast mansion. Amelia, however, found herself in an unusual position. For the first time, she wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a Harrington, albeit one whose place in the family was far from conventional. The revelation of her parentage had brought her closer to Nathan, but the wounds between her and Margaret remained raw and unhealed. One afternoon, as Amelia walked through the garden, she found Nathan seated near the fountain, staring at the weathered stone. He looked up as she approached, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "This place feels different now, doesn't it?" he asked. Amelia nodded, her gaze lingering on the fountain. "It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next." Nathan chuckled softly. "It's been through a lot, so have we." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history settling between them. Finally, Nathan turned to her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what we do next, about the legacy of this family." Amelia frowned. "What do you mean?" "My father loved this place," Nathan said, gesturing to the sprawling gardens and the mansion beyond. "But his mistakes, and my mother's decisions, tarnished everything he built. If we're going to move forward, we need to make things right." Amelia's heart softened. "What does making things right look like?" Nathan hesitated, then smiled. "It looks like us working together, building something better, something honest." That evening, Amelia returned to her room to find an envelope on her desk. The handwriting on the front was elegant and unmistakable. It was from Margaret. With a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, Amelia opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words written with precision. "Amelia, I know I cannot undo what has been done, but I hope you can find it in your heart to meet with me. There is more I need to say, things I should have told you long ago. Margaret." Amelia stared at the note, her emotions swirling. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to leave Margaret to face the consequences of her actions alone. But another part of her, the part that still carried the hope of understanding her mother's choices, knew she needed to hear what Margaret had to say. The following morning, Amelia made her way to Margaret's private sitting room. The door was slightly ajar, and she knocked softly before stepping inside. Margaret sat by the window, the morning light casting a pale glow over her features. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "You came," Margaret said, her voice quieter than Amelia had ever heard it. "You asked me to," Amelia replied, keeping her tone neutral. Margaret gestured to a chair across from her. "Please sit." Amelia hesitated, then complied, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I owe you an apology," Margaret began, her gaze fixed on the window. "For what I did to your mother. For what I did to you." Amelia's chest tightened. "Why did you do it? Why didn't you let her stay?" Margaret sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of losing everything I had worked so hard to maintain. Charles, he had a way of making me feel invisible, and when your mother came into the picture, it only made things worse. She was everything I wasn't. Kind, warm, full of life. She didn't deserve what you did to her," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "She was just trying to protect me." "I know," Margaret said, her voice breaking, "and I hated her for it. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she reminded me of everything I had lost. I thought forcing her out would fix things, but it only made them worse." Amelia stared at her, a mixture of anger and pity swirling inside her. "Do you regret it?" "Every day," Margaret whispered. "But regret doesn't change the past. It doesn't bring her back." "No," Amelia said firmly, "but it's a start." Over the next few weeks, Amelia and Margaret began the slow and painful process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy. Decades of bitterness and secrecy couldn't be undone overnight, but they both made an effort. Margaret shared stories about Charles, offering Amelia glimpses of the father she had never known. In turn, Amelia told Margaret about her mother's strength and resilience, painting a picture of the woman Margaret had tried to forget. Nathan played a pivotal role in bridging the gap, encouraging both women to find common ground. His support brought the fractured family closer together, though he often joked about the unexpected turn his life had taken. "I never thought I'd be the peacemaker," he said one evening as they sat in the library. "But here we are." One sunny afternoon, Amelia stood in the garden, watching Matteo play near the fountain. Her son's laughter filled the air, a reminder of the joy that still existed despite everything. Nathan joined her, his hands in his pockets. "You've brought life back to this place," Nathan said, his voice warm. "It's not just me," Amelia replied. "It's all of us." He smiled, then grew serious. "Have you thought about what comes next? What you want to do?" Amelia looked out at the estate, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and possibility. "I want to stay, not just for me but for Matteo. I want him to know where he comes from, to grow up surrounded by family." Nathan nodded. "Then we'll make it work. Together." For the first time, Amelia felt a sense of belonging, not just to the estate, but to the family that had once tried to push her away. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to walk it. As the sun set over the Harrington estate, Amelia stood by the fountain, her mother's locket in her hand. The secrets of the past had been unearthed, and though the wounds were still fresh, there was hope. Hope for healing, hope for forgiveness, and hope for a future built on truth. "I'll make you proud, Mama," Amelia whispered. "I promise." Beside her, Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder, his presence steady and reassuring. Together, they turned and walked back toward the house, ready to face whatever came next. Life at the Harrington estate settled into a cautious rhythm in the weeks that followed. The tension that once filled the halls had eased, replaced by an atmosphere of tentative rebuilding. Amelia, Nathan, and even Margaret were working toward something none of them had expected. A sense of family, fractured but not beyond repair. One morning, Amelia stood in the grand kitchen, preparing breakfast with Matteo. The boy had taken to life at the estate with surprising ease, his curiosity about the sprawling mansion and its history endless. "Mom," Matteo said, holding up a family photograph they had found in a dusty drawer, Is that Grandpa Charles? Amelia froze, her gaze softening as she looked at the image of her father. Yes, that's him. Mateo studied the picture closely. He looks kind. Do you think he would have liked me? Tears pricked Amelia's eyes, but she smiled. I think he would have loved you. Nathan walked in, overhearing the exchange. He would have spoiled you rotten, he added, ruffling Mateo's hair. Just like he did me. Mateo grinned, his face lighting up with joy. Watching them, Amelia felt a pang of gratitude for Nathan's presence. He had embraced her and Mateo fully, showing them the kind of acceptance she never thought possible. Margaret, however, remained a more complicated figure. While she had softened toward Amelia and Mateo, there were still moments when the weight of the past hung between them. One such moment came when Margaret invited Amelia to tea in the solarium, a rare gesture of goodwill. I wanted to thank you, Margaret said as they sat across from each other, the sunlight streaming through the glass walls. For what? Amelia asked, her tone cautious. For staying, Margaret replied, her voice hesitant. You could have left after everything came out. Most people would have. Amelia took a deep breath, her gaze steady. I stayed because I want Mateo to have a family, and because I believe this place can be something better. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she set her teacup down. I'm trying, Amelia. I hope you can see that. I do, Amelia said softly. But it's going to take time for both of us. Margaret nodded, her expression a mix of relief and vulnerability. I understand. The estate itself began to change as well. Inspired by Amelia's vision, Nathan proposed opening the Harrington estate to the community. Once a symbol of exclusivity and privilege, the mansion and its grounds were transformed into a space where people could gather, learn, and create. The once abandoned garden was restored, its fountain a centerpiece for a new memorial honoring Charles and Carmen. On the day of the garden's dedication, Amelia stood before a small crowd of villagers, her heart pounding. Nathan stood beside her, his presence grounding her. This place has always been more than a house, Amelia began, her voice steady. It's a part of all of us. Our past, our present, and our future. Today, we honor the people who made this place what it is, and commit to building something better together. The crowd erupted into applause, and Amelia felt a wave of pride and emotion wash over her. For the first time, she felt like she belonged not just to the estate, but to the family and the community it represented. Later that evening, Amelia found herself standing by the fountain, the cool breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Nathan joined her, his hands in his pockets. You did good today, he said, his voice warm. We did good, Amelia corrected, smiling. Nathan chuckled. Fair enough. But this, everything we've done, it wouldn't have happened without you. Amelia looked at him, her heart full. And it wouldn't have happened without you either. You believed in me when no one else did. Nathan hesitated, then reached out, his hand brushing hers. That's because I knew you were worth believing in. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. Amelia's heart raced, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper swelling within her. But before she could respond, Mateo's voice called out from the house. Mom! Uncle Nathan! Come see this! Nathan grinned, stepping back. Duty calls. Amelia laughed softly, following him back to the house, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the days turned into weeks, the Harrington family continued to grow, not in wealth or power, but in connection and purpose. Amelia, Nathan, and even Margaret worked to build a legacy that honored the past while embracing the future. And through it all, Amelia found herself healing, not just for her own sake, but for her mother's. Standing in the garden one evening, Amelia held her mother's locket tightly. The stars above twinkled like distant memories, and for the first time, she felt at peace. I hope you can see us now, Mama, she whispered. We're finally whole again. Beside her, Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder, his presence a steady reminder that she was no longer alone. The Harrington estate had undergone a transformation, not just in its physical presence but in the lives of those who called it home. Amelia, Nathan, and even Margaret found themselves navigating new relationships and uncharted emotional terrain. But as the mansion opened its doors to the community, the shadows of the past lingered, waiting to be addressed. One crisp autumn morning, Amelia decided to visit the local archives. She had read every letter and journal left behind by Charles, but she felt there was more to uncover. The connection between her mother and her father was clear, but their story remained incomplete. Nathan joined her, his curiosity piqued by her determination. "What are you hoping to find?" he asked as they walked down the cobbled streets. "Anything," Amelia replied. "There are still gaps. Why my mother never reached out to me after she left, what happened to her in those years before she died. I need to know." Nathan nodded. "Then let's find out." The archives were quiet, their walls lined with rows of neatly labeled records and documents. Amelia and Nathan combed through employee records, letters, and financial ledgers from the Harrington estate's history. Hours passed, and just as Amelia was beginning to lose hope, she stumbled upon a file that stopped her cold. It was a series of letters between Margaret and a private investigator. The first was dated just days after Carmen's dismissal. "Dear Mr. Hargrove, I trust your discretion in this matter. The individual in question, Carmen Alvarez, has left the estate, but I require confirmation that she has not returned to the area. Please provide regular updates. Margaret Harrington." The subsequent letters revealed that Margaret had gone to great lengths to monitor Carmen's whereabouts. The final letter, dated 2 years after Carmen's dismissal, confirmed her death in a car accident. Amelia's hands trembled as she read the investigator's words. "Dear Mrs. Harrington, I regret to inform you that the subject of our investigation, Carmen Alvarez, passed away last month. The details of the incident indicate no foul play, but I will keep you informed if any new information arises." Nathan leaned over her shoulder, his expression darkening. She knew your mother had died and didn't tell you." Amelia's heart ached as the truth settled over her. She didn't just push her out. She watched her every move. She made sure she couldn't come back. Nathan placed a hand on her arm. "We have to confront her." Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. She needs to explain this. That evening, Amelia and Nathan found Margaret in the drawing room, seated by the fire with a book in her hands. She looked up as they entered, her face guarded. "What now?" she asked, setting the book aside. Amelia stepped forward, the letters clutched tightly in her hand. "You knew my mother was dead. You've known for years." Margaret's face paled, but she said nothing. "You hired someone to track her," Amelia continued, her voice trembling with anger. "You kept tabs on her after you forced her out, and when she died, you didn't even try to tell me. Why?" Margaret's hands gripped the arms of her chair, her composure cracking. "Because I didn't want you to know," she admitted quietly. I thought it would be easier for you if you believed she had simply left." "Easier?" Amelia's voice broke. "You thought it was easier for me to grow up thinking she abandoned me?" Margaret looked away, shame flickering across her face. "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Nathan interjected, his tone sharp. "This isn't just a mistake, Mother. This is a lifetime of lies and control." Margaret's voice trembled as she spoke. "I was trying to protect you, both of you. I thought if the past stayed buried, we could all move on. But we didn't," Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't protect me. You took away my chance to know the truth, to mourn her properly." Margaret's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable, almost fragile. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I truly am." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Amelia's anger burned hot, but beneath it, she felt the stirrings of something else. Pity, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of understanding. "I can't forgive you," Amelia said finally. "Not yet. But I need you to know that what you did wasn't protection. It was selfishness." Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know." Nathan stepped beside Amelia, his expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "If we're going to rebuild this family, it starts with honesty. No more secrets. Margaret's gaze lingered on him, then shifted to Amelia. I'll try, she said quietly. But it's not easy to undo a lifetime of mistakes. No, it's not, Amelia said. But it's a start. In the days that followed, Margaret began to open up about the choices she had made. She shared stories of her life with Charles, the pressures of maintaining the Harrington legacy, and the guilt she had carried since Carmen's departure. Though the process was slow and painful, it marked the beginning of a new chapter for their family. Amelia, too, found herself beginning to heal. She spent more time in the garden, restoring the fountain and planting flowers in her mother's memory. Mateo joined her often, his laughter filling the once quiet estate with life. Nathan became her steadfast ally, offering support and encouragement as they worked to create a legacy built on truth and connection rather than secrets and lies. One evening, Amelia stood by the fountain, the soft glow of lanterns illuminating the garden. She held her mother's locket in her hand, her heart heavy but full. I hope you're proud of me, Mama, she whispered. I'm finally learning how to move forward. Nathan appeared beside her, his presence a comforting reminder that she wasn't alone. You've come a long way, he said, his voice warm. So have you, Amelia replied, smiling. They stood together in silence, the stars above twinkling like distant memories. For the first time, Amelia felt a sense of peace, not because the wounds of the past were gone, but because they were no longer holding her back. The Harrington estate, once a fortress of secrets, now stood as a testament to transformation and resilience. The garden, once overgrown and forgotten, had blossomed into a vibrant symbol of renewal. Amelia, Nathan, and even Margaret had spent months working together to rebuild not only the physical space but also the emotional bonds between them. On a sunny afternoon, the estate hosted its first community gathering, a celebration of the new Harrington Foundation, a charitable organization aimed at supporting local families and preserving the estate's history. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation as villagers roamed the gardens, children splashing in the fountain, and tables laden with food stood under canopies. Amelia stood near the fountain, her son Mateo beside her. He had taken to life at the estate with ease, his boundless energy bringing a sense of joy to the once somber halls. Nathan approached, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. You look proud, he said, handing her one. I am, Amelia admitted, smiling as she looked around. This is what my mother deserved, a legacy that honors her. Nathan's expression softened. She'd be proud of you, of both of us. Amelia glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper she hadn't yet named. We couldn't have done it without each other. Margaret, though quieter than usual, moved among the guests with grace, offering polite conversation and warm smiles. Amelia noticed her lingering near the fountain, her expression distant. Taking a deep breath, Amelia approached her. You okay? Amelia asked softly. Margaret nodded, her gaze fixed on the water. I was just thinking about Charles. He loved this place, especially the garden. He would have been happy to see it like this. Amelia hesitated before speaking. I think he'd be proud of you too. Margaret looked at her, surprise flickering in her eyes. You do? Yes, Amelia said. You've made mistakes, we all have, but you're trying, and that means something. Margaret's lips trembled, and for a moment, Amelia thought she might cry. Instead, Margaret reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Thank you, Amelia. That means more than you know. As the sun set over the estate, the guests began to leave, their laughter and joy echoing in the air long after they had gone. Amelia, Nathan, and Mateo sat by the fountain, the soft glow of lanterns casting golden light over their faces. I still can't believe this is real, Amelia said, looking out at the garden. It feels like a dream. Nathan chuckled. If it's a dream, it's one we built together. Mateo yawned, leaning against Amelia's side. This place is the best, he mumbled sleepily. Amelia kissed the top of his head, her heart full. It's home. Later that evening, Amelia stood in the library, her mother's locket in her hand. She opened it, staring at the photograph inside. For so long, she had carried the weight of her mother's absence, the pain of not knowing the truth. But now, she felt a sense of peace. Not because everything had been resolved, but because she had found her place in the story. Nathan joined her, his presence grounding her as always. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "My mother," Amelia said. "And my father. How much they sacrificed, how much they loved." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "They gave us a foundation, and now it's up to us to build something meaningful on it." Amelia smiled, slipping the locket into her pocket. "I think we've already started." In the days that followed, life at the estate settled into a new rhythm. Margaret continued to work on her relationship with Amelia and Matteo, slowly shedding the armor she had worn for decades. Nathan dedicated himself to the foundation, finding purpose in preserving his family's legacy. And Amelia, for the first time in years, felt whole. One evening, as the stars shimmered above the estate, Amelia stood in the garden, the cool breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. She closed her eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over her. "I hope you see us now, Mama," she whispered. "We're finally where we're meant to be." Nathan appeared beside her, his gaze warm. "You ready to head inside?" Amelia turned to him, her heart light. "Yeah, let's go home." Together, they walked back toward the house, their steps steady, their future bright, and their family stronger than ever.